and Minister. Look, I've got quite a lot, but I'll start with the new Infrastructure Australia priority list. It's just been released, so congratulations on getting the new list out. And it's really good to see that a larger number of the priority projects have now got full business cases. We've got the list out. I was just wondering, in terms of what the rationale for the projects that have ended up as high priority and priority, can you sort of outline the rationale for that, how those projects have ended up on that list?
Thank you, Senator. So as part of the overall assessment process, we're looking at threshold questions around is this potential project nationally significant? And then we go through an assessment process that looks at the relative impact of that potential project. And that really leads us to looking at the economic, social, environmental and strategic merit of each of those potential projects. And through that process, we're assigning projects which are going to have a greater economic impact as high priority projects, or indeed initiatives if they're at the early stage. And then everything else is characterised as just as a priority. So I think that the important message is the fact they're all on the list means they're nationally significant. They're all a priority. And therefore the high priority is really a reflection of the higher economic impact of that.
And is all of that rationale and assessment publicly available on your website?
Yes, it is, Senator. It's all part of the process on the website.
Right, and you think it's important to have all of that rationale and that assessment publicly available?
Yes.
Yes. Yep. So it seems that sort of the high priority, the projects, you've got about half dealing with urban congestion and national connectivity and freight. So we've got, I think, you've got 14 projects overall being either high priority or priority, and 7 of them are dealing with urban congestion. So that's the case. So, and it appears that you've only got, of those 7 urban congestion ones, only one of those is a public transport project. Can you comment on the fact that we've seem to have a bit of a lack of balance between the road projects and public transport projects?
Yeah, thanks, Senator. So if you remember back to when we relaunched the priority list in February of this year, at that stage there were 91 initiatives on the list and indeed only 2 projects. As you recognised in your opening remarks, we've had a very good period of time since February where a number of these initiatives have come back to us as business cases and indeed have gone through the assessment process and been assessed by IA's board. So we've now got a much healthier number of projects on the list. In terms of what comes forward to us, that's a combination of bottom-up evidence, which is the basis for establishing the priority list back in February. But it's very much down to the jurisdictions in terms of what they're working on and advancing. And I think it's fair to say a number of these business cases are ones that either have been previously developed by a jurisdiction or kind of brought through in perhaps a more accelerated way since we relaunched the list. So the short answer is what comes to us is really outside of our control. It's what is ready to come to us from the jurisdiction. Keeping in mind many of these business cases, they can take 18 months or 2 years to actually develop. So I think it's just the nature of what's come to us. In terms of the categorisation, we find that helpful. That's rather useful for us in terms of organising the list, but and just getting our own minds around what the different problems are we're seeking to solve and what some of those projects might be. So, there's no other use of it other than that in terms of ordering it on the list.
So is it a concern to Infrastructure Australia that the road projects seem to be have come to you in much greater numbers than we've only got one public transport project, the Perth Forest Field Link? I mean, the infrastructure plan really in the executive summary really focuses on the importance of high frequency interconnected public transport systems, the need to be reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, the role of public transport in doing that, the role of public transport in enabling people to shift from cars to public transport. So you've got a plan that says we need to be putting a high emphasis on improving our public transport systems, but yet what's coming through to you are only road projects, or largely only road projects.
Yeah, in terms of what's been assessed and put on the list most recently, we have some rail projects as well as road projects. I think it's important to mention as well that we're currently assessing some very significant public transport projects, such as Melbourne Metro, Cross River Rail, Sydney Metro. So there's some very significant business cases in the pipeline.
But you've also got significant business cases for further road projects, like the Western Distributor, Armidale Road, the Swan Valley Bypass in the pipeline as well.
Beauty, bring on the Swan Valley. So pull your finger out. Sorry about that. Anything that moves trucks up and down that west coast, you beauty.
So, I mean, but do you concede that these projects, these road projects, seem to be getting more of a priority by state governments and the projects that are being brought to you for assessment than the public transport projects?
The order in which state governments want to develop their projects is really a matter for them as part of their strategic plan. I think, what we're looking at the bigger picture through the priority list in terms of, the evidence base that we developed through the audit. What are the problems we're seeking to solve? We have a number of initiatives. Some of them are actually quite strategic, high-level initiatives on the priority list. It's really a matter for the state and territory governments in terms of, or the private sector for that matter, in terms of what they bring to us.
But in order to meet the outcomes that you set out in your infrastructure plan, do you feel that it's going to be necessary for the states to have a better balance of public transport versus road projects? Otherwise, your plan's just meaningless. It's not able to be implemented.
Yeah, I think how the state government responds to the problem is a matter for them. They do the detailed work of the modelling and the integrated planning. So that's really a matter for them. The order in which they want to tackle urban congestion, which clearly was a big discussion point after we released the audit. That's a big part of the problem we're seeking to solve, where congestion.
So basically, your plan just sits there as to be ignored, to be taken account of or ignored by the state governments at will.
So I think that the plan provides an evidence-based baseline for all governments to refer to, as well as the private sector.
But if the states only want to prioritise putting road projects to you, you can't do anything about that.
That's a matter for the states.
I also see that Inland Rail is the only project on the list that's on the list as a longer-term project rather than near-term. So why is that the case?
So when we updated the priority list, we try to give some time categorisation, both with two lenses. One in terms of when's this problem going to be manifest, to try and encourage longer-term planning. So we've got 3 timestamps: 5, 10 and 15 years in terms of when's this problem going to be manifest. That's represented in the initiatives on the list. And then when the projects come forward, the timestamp rather moves to, well, when do we need to implement? Obviously there's a physical project there, so when do we really need this solution? So Inland Rail falls into that longer term.
So you're saying it's not needed
project.
In the short term?
It's a long, the timestamp for Inland Rail, because that's now a project, is really a longer term timeline because of the time it's going to take to construct, which is I think around, the department can probably speak with more detail on the implementation program, but it's of the order of 10 years. So it's a long-term.
What's your assessment of the need, and obviously how quickly it can be built depends upon the resources that are put towards it. What's Infrastructure Australia's assessment of how urgent the need for Inland Rail is?
So we published our assessment back in May of this year. So within that we said, actually I'm looking at it now. So within the assessment we recognised that 10-year construction time frame, but clearly the activities to start the detailed planning and implementation of that project have already now commenced. So these projects take a long time to implement.
But I mean, other projects do as well. I mean, some of the other ones that are on the short term are equally, complex projects. They're just being given priority in terms of funding to enable them to proceed more quickly.
So our assessment doesn't take account of the funding. That's a matter for government or governments. So rather, our assessment is looking at two things: when is this going to be a problem that we need to solve, and then if it's a project, when do we actually need?
Well, can
to
I
have this up
clarify
and
then?
running?
So, what's the Infrastructure Australia's assessment of what the time frame that it's needed on is? Are you saying that it's not needed for the long term until the longer term, or is it just? Yeah.
Yes, yes, and that's reflected, but that's reflected in the fact that it's a 10-year construction. So the solutions needed.
But you could construct it more quickly if the resources were available. It could be constructed more quickly if the resources were available.
Well, in terms of the construction, it's a fairly complex project in terms of construction. In terms of the construction process, that's again, that's a matter for the proponent, which is, been part of the work they've done to put their business case together and their detailed work program. In our assessment, we're reflecting that that's been selected as the most efficient way of delivering that project. So, we're just merely respecting that that's the best approach to deliver best value for money.
Do you have a projected cost-benefit cost assessment for Inland Rail?
So for Inland Rail, again, we were provided with the business case and by the proponent, and the benefit cost ratio is 1.1.
Right.
And that was the basis for our assessment. So as you know, Senator, we don't do our own benefit cost ratio. We're assessing the work done by the proponent.
Okay. And how is your assessment of the Melbourne Metro going?
So Melbourne Metro's again one of those large public transport projects that we're currently reviewing the business case for that. So that work's proceeding. Again, very complex projects, a lot of supporting material, a lot of background analysis. So we're just working through that with the Victorian government. So as we always do with these projects, is a continuous flow of information, questions and answers.
And so what documents have you been given by the Victorian government, or have you requested from the Victorian government to help your assessment of Melbourne Metro?
So we've requested obviously we've got the base business case material, and then there's a number which I don't have in front of me, but a number of supporting documents that are provided, and actually a large part of our role is to do our own due diligence of the business case, and as is common with these projects, there'll be a period of toing and froing with the proponent.
Could you take that on notice to list the projects that you have been given or have requested from the Victorian government for the Melbourne Metro assessment? And if you could get that back to us today, that would be terrific.
Yes, Senator, we've got quite a list of documents for that project. We can give that to you.
Senator Rice, without interfering in your momentum, in this passage, are you sort of towards... there'll be plenty more opportunity. We're here for a good while on this.
Okay. I've got another couple of questions on Melbourne Metro, and then and then I'll come back for my next lot. So, so in particular, in terms of the documents, have you received the independent peer reviews that were done of the project, of the transport and economic modelling of the project?
Senator, we do have a peer review of that project. Whether it fits your category of a peer review, I'm not certain. We can certainly include that document on the list of documents that we've received.
I mean, we had a freedom of information request through the Victorian state government, and there were some independent peer reviews of the transport and economic modelling. Mm-hmm. The transport modelling that was undertaken by John Allard, I think it was, and the economic modelling undertaken by KPMG. So I'd be interested to know whether you've got those.
Yes, we have the KPMG report. I don't believe we have the other one.
Right. And do you feel that, in terms of, have you got any, what do you see the value of those peer reviews to add to the work that you were doing?
I think, generally speaking, as I mentioned, we're doing our own due diligence, so we'll often be looking at the same kind of things that.
So they're in some ways analogous to the work that you're doing.
Yeah. So we'll be looking at the similar things, perhaps to any peer review, and it's you know, it's always helpful to see what kind of questions other people are
So
asking.
those
But it's
independent,
really, but to be honest, we're doing our own independent peer review, so. you
but
know,
those
in effect-
independent peer reviews are of value to you.
On occasion, they can be, yes.
And what have we got an idea at the moment of what overall benefit cost ratio we're looking at for Melbourne Metro?
So I can only quote what's publicly available from the Victorian government, which is BCR of 1.1, Senator.
Right. And when's your review of Melbourne Metro going to be completed, do you expect?
That's often a hard question to answer because, you know, as I mentioned, these business cases, in fact, this one's evolved over several years. These business cases are complex and, you know, often you go and ask a range of questions and get some more information back, you do more analysis and then rather come up with an even longer list of questions. So it's really hard to answer the question, but from our point of view, we're trying to complete these business case assessments as quickly as we
Well,
can.
have you got an indicative idea?
Yeah, I'd say, Senator, that assessment is getting closer to being finished. I'm not so bold as to put a date on it.
So sometime in 2017, presuming.
Possibly before then, Senator.
Possibly before 2017. Okay, oh, that sounds optimistic. All right, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.